The morning sun beat down on Officer Wilson as she pulled up to the convenience store. Dark circles hung under her eyes from another sleepless night. 3 emergency calls already, and it wasn't even noon. Her radio crackled with static as the dispatcher reported a disturbance at the quick stop on 5th Street. "Just what I need today," she muttered, adjusting her uniform and checking her equipment belt. The weight of her badge felt particularly heavy this morning. The convenience store came into view. A small crowd had gathered outside. Through the glass windows, Officer Wilson could see people arguing. Her shoulders tensed as she parked and stepped out of her patrol car. "Police, everyone stay where you are," she called out, pushing through the onlookers. The summer heat made her irritable, sweat already forming at her temples. Inside, a young clerk looked frightened behind the counter. 2 teenagers stood nearby, looking guilty. And then there was him, a tall black man in a crisp business suit, standing between the clerk and the teens. He had his hands raised slightly, speaking in a calm voice. "Everyone just take a breath. We can sort this out without anyone getting in trouble," the man was saying. He turned when Officer Wilson entered, his expression relieved. "Officer, thank goodness. These young men accidentally knocked over. Step back from the counter now." Officer Wilson ordered, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her hand moved instinctively to her belt. The man's brow furrowed. "Officer, I'm just trying to help defuse the situation. These kids didn't mean any." "I said step back." Her voice rose sharply. Something about his confident manner rubbed her the wrong way. Who did he think he was, taking control of the scene before she arrived? "Ma'am, I understand, but if you just listen for a moment," he continued, his voice still measured and professional. Without warning, Officer Wilson grabbed the man's arm and spun him around, pushing him roughly against the wall. The store went silent except for the soft music playing from overhead speakers. "Hands behind your back," she demanded. "This is completely unnecessary," the man said, no longer hiding the frustration in his voice. "I was helping resolve the situation." The clerk spoke up timidly. "Officer, he really was helping. The teenagers knocked over a display, and he was just—" "I'll handle this," Officer Wilson snapped, cutting off the explanation. She tightened her grip on the man's arm. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," he replied, his voice tight with controlled anger as he complied with her demands. "But you're making a serious mistake." Something in his tone, the authority, the certainty, sparked something in Officer Wilson. Who was he to question her judgment? Her day had been long, her patience thin. When he turned slightly to look at her, she struck him across the shoulder, pushing him harder against the wall. "That's assault," he said quietly, no longer struggling, just stating a fact. "And it's on camera." He nodded toward the store's security system and the smartphones that several bystanders had raised to record the interaction. Officer Wilson felt a flush of anger and embarrassment but pushed ahead. She clicked the handcuffs into place and recited his rights mechanically. The man didn't argue further, allowing himself to be led to the patrol car with dignity despite the handcuffs. "Your badge number is 8541, he noted calmly as she guided him outside. "And my name is Lieutenant Thomas Richardson. I started yesterday as your department's new deputy commissioner." Officer Wilson's steps faltered. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Some were recording, some were whispering. Her mouth went dry as the man's words sank in. "That can't be right," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Call it in," he suggested quietly. "Ask for Chief Bennett. He'll confirm my identity." Officer Wilson's hand shook slightly as she reached for her radio, a cold feeling of dread spreading through her chest as she realized what she had done. The ride to the police station was the longest 15 minutes of Officer Wilson's career. Lieutenant Richardson sat silently in the back seat, his face revealing nothing. She caught his eyes in a rearview mirror once or twice, but quickly looked away, her cheeks burning with something between anger and shame. When they arrived at the station, several officers glanced up from their desks. Officer Chen, who had been with the department for 20 years, stood abruptly when he saw Lieutenant Richardson in handcuffs. "What's going on here?" Officer Chen asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. Officer Wilson gripped Lieutenant Richardson's arm firmly, guiding him through the bullpen. "Disturbance at the quick stop. This man was interfering with." "Good morning, Lieutenant Richardson," came a booming voice from across the room. Chief Bennett emerged from his office, coffee mug in hand, his expression shifting from welcome to confusion. The room fell silent. Officer Wilson's grip on Richardson's arm loosened. "Would someone explain why our new deputy commissioner is in handcuffs?" Chief Bennett asked, his calm voice barely hiding his anger. Officer Wilson felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "Sir, there was a situation at the quick stop, and this man was—" She stopped, the words dying in her throat. "This is really Lieutenant Richardson." "The very same," Chief Bennett confirmed. "Just transferred from the downtown precinct to head our department's new community outreach and reform initiative." He turned to Lieutenant Richardson. "I'm deeply sorry about this misunderstanding, sir." The chief's use of "sir" hammered home the reality to Officer Wilson. She fumbled with her keys, quickly removing the handcuffs from Richardson's wrists. Lieutenant Richardson rubbed his wrists gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice controlled. A small red mark was visible on his face, where it had pressed against the wall. "My office now," Chief Bennett said, not specifying whether he meant Wilson or Richardson or both. The three walked in tense silence past curious eyes and whispers. Once inside, Chief Bennett closed the door. "Lieutenant, let me first apologize on behalf of the entire department." Richardson nodded, straightening his suit jacket. "I'd like to speak with Officer Wilson alone first, if that's acceptable." Chief Bennett looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. I'll be right outside." He gave Officer Wilson a look that clearly said her job hung by a thread before stepping out. Alone with Richardson, Officer Wilson stared at the floor. The gravity of what she'd done was sinking in. Not only had she wrongfully arrested a civilian, but she'd assaulted a superior officer, one specifically brought in to address the very behaviors she'd just demonstrated. "Do you know why I didn't identify myself immediately?" Lieutenant Richardson asked, his voice quieter now. Officer Wilson shook her head. "Because it shouldn't have mattered who I was," he continued. "The way you treated me wasn't wrong because I turned out to be your boss. It was wrong, period." Officer Wilson swallowed hard. "Sir, I made a mistake. I misread the situation." "Did you?" Richardson asked. "Or did you see a black man and make assumptions about what was happening?" The bluntness of the question made her flinch. She wanted to deny it, to say she would have treated anyone the same way, but the truth hung heavy in the air between them. "There were witnesses," Richardson continued, "security footage, cell phone videos that are probably already online. Do you understand the position you've put yourself in? The position you've put this department in?" Officer Wilson nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sir." "Your badge and gun," he said, extending his hand. Her heart sank as she slowly unclipped her badge and removed her service weapon, placing them in his outstretched hand. Years of academy training, patrol work, everything she'd worked for, gone in an instant. "You're on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full investigation," Richardson explained. "I'll need your statement before you leave today." Officer Wilson nodded again, unable to speak. As they prepared to leave the office, Lieutenant Richardson paused with his hand on the doorknob. "The irony isn't lost on me that my first official act in this department is to suspend an officer for misconduct against me personally." He sighed deeply. "This isn't how either of us wanted to start this relationship." He opened the door to face the chief and the curious stares of the entire precinct, leaving Officer Wilson to confront the consequences of actions that could no longer be undone. By evening, the video had spread across social media like wildfire. Officer Wilson sat alone in her apartment, watching her own actions play out on her laptop screen for what felt like the 100th time. The footage was worse than she remembered. Her aggressive stance, the unnecessary force, the look of shock on Lieutenant Richardson's face when she struck him. Her phone buzzed again. Another news outlet requesting comment. She'd turned it off twice already, but kept checking it, like picking at a wound. 3 reporters had already knocked on her door. She'd pretended not to be home. "What were you thinking?" Her brother had asked when he called earlier. He worked construction across town and had seen the video during lunch break. Even he, who had always defended her career choice to their skeptical parents, seemed at a loss. "I wasn't thinking," she had answered honestly. Now, as darkness fell outside her window, those 3 words haunted her. 28 years old with an 8-year career that might already be over. All because she hadn't taken 5 seconds to assess the situation properly. Her apartment felt smaller than usual. The walls of her living room were decorated with photos from her police academy graduation, awards from her first years on the force. They now seemed to mock her from their frames. Across town, Lieutenant Richardson pressed a bag of frozen peas against his shoulder where a bruise was forming. His wife placed a mug of tea on the coffee table beside him. "You should see the doctor," she said, concern etched across her face. "It's just a bruise," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't the point. "The department's getting flooded with calls," he added. "The mayor's office too." His phone rang again, the 5th call from the chief in as many hours. Each conversation had grown more tense as the public reaction mounted. "People are calling for her badge," the chief had said during their last call. "And what do you think should happen?" Richardson had asked. The chief had paused. "Policy says termination. Clear-cut case of excessive force caught on multiple cameras." Richardson had remained silent, thinking. Now, as he sipped his tea, his 12-year-old son wandered into the living room. "Dad, you're all over TikTok," he said, holding up his phone. "My friends are asking if you're okay." Richardson set down his mug. "What are people saying in the comments?" His son looked uncomfortable. "Some really mean stuff. About the police lady. And some people are saying bad things about you too." Richardson nodded slowly. "This is why I took this job," he said quietly. "To try to change things." "Aren't you going to get her fired?" his son asked. The question hung in the air. Richardson had been asking himself the same thing all day. Back at the precinct, officers worked their shifts in unusual silence. The typical banter was gone, replaced by hushed conversations that stopped whenever someone new entered the break room. Officer Chen, who had recognized Lieutenant Richardson at the station, sat at his desk finishing paperwork. Another officer approached. "You think Wilson's done?" she asked. Chen shrugged. "Have to be, right? Can't come back from something like this." "It could have been any of us," another officer chimed in. "Split-second decision. We've all been there." "No," Chen said firmly. "Not like that. I saw the video. That wasn't procedure. That was something else." The conversation ended abruptly as their shift supervisor walked by. Meanwhile, community leaders were already organizing a protest planned for the following day. Local news crews interviewed people outside the convenience store where it had happened. "This is nothing new," said one elderly resident who lived nearby. "Just knew that it happened to someone with power." By midnight, Officer Wilson had finally turned off all her devices. Sleep wouldn't come. She stared at her ceiling, replaying not just that morning's events, but other arrests, other interactions. Had there been other times she acted too quickly? Made assumptions that weren't fair? The department's mandatory bias training sessions she'd sat through over the years came back to her. She'd always half-listened, thinking they didn't apply to her. Now those lessons played on repeat in her mind. Sometime around 3 a.m., she got up and wrote an email to Lieutenant Richardson. She deleted it 3 times before settling on a simple message. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'd like to talk when you're ready." She didn't expect a response. But sending it was the first moments since the handcuffs clicked that she felt like she could breathe. As dawn broke, neither Officer Wilson nor Lieutenant Richardson had slept. Both knew that what happened next would define not just their own futures, but potentially reshape their entire department. 3 days had passed since the incident. Officer Wilson sat in her living room, curtains drawn against the occasional news van that still parked outside her building. Her uniform hung untouched in her closet. The TV was off. She couldn't bear to see herself on the news anymore. A stack of papers lay on her coffee table, printouts of her arrest records for the past 2 years. She'd requested them yesterday in a moment of desperate self-examination. Now, colored markers in hand, she was going through each one, marking patterns she'd never noticed before. Blue for white suspects, green for black suspects, yellow for others. Blue arrests, mostly warnings, citations. Green arrests, mostly handcuffs, calls for backup. The pattern was undeniable, staring back at her in bright colors. Had she really been like this all along? The realization made her stomach twist. Her phone rang, her mom again. This time she answered. "I'm fine, Mom," she said before her mother could ask. Your father and I are worried. We haven't heard from you in days. Officer Wilson sighed. I messed up, Mom. Really bad. Everyone makes mistakes, honey. No, this wasn't just a mistake. She looked at her color-coded papers. I think I've been wrong for a long time. There was silence on the line before her mother asked, What are you going to do now? It was the question she'd been asking herself since sending that late-night email to Lieutenant Richardson, an email that remained unanswered. Across town, Lieutenant Richardson sat in his new office, still surrounded by moving boxes. The department photo ID clipped to his shirt seemed to mock the bruise still visible on his face. The door opened and Chief Bennett entered without knocking. Internal Affairs finished their preliminary report, the chief said, dropping a folder on the desk. Open and shut case. They're recommending termination and possible criminal charges. Lieutenant Richardson opened the folder. Inside were statements from witnesses, stills from security footage, Officer Wilson's spotty disciplinary record. She sent me an email, Richardson said, pushing his laptop toward the chief. 3 nights ago. The chief read it quickly. Doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't, Richardson agreed. But it matters what happens next. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the protest that had been going on outside the station for days. Signs demanding justice and ACCAUNT waved in the morning breeze. When I took this job, Richardson said, I promised to make real changes in this department. Not just policies on paper, but in how officers think and act. You want to make an example of her, the chief guessed. Richardson shook his head. No. I want to make an example of how we handle this. If we just fire her and move on, what actually changes? Another officer with the same biases takes her place. The chief frowned. The public wants blood. The public wants justice, Richardson corrected. Those aren't always the same thing. Later that afternoon, Officer Wilson jumped when her doorbell rang. She peered through the peephole, expecting another reporter. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar woman in professional clothes. Officer Wilson? My name is Dr. Powell. I'm a psychologist specializing in implicit bias in law enforcement. Lieutenant Richardson asked me to come see you. Surprised, Officer Wilson let her in. Dr. Powell settled on the couch, eyeing the color-coded arrest records. Interesting project, she commented. My own idea, Officer Wilson said quietly. I needed to see it for myself. And what did you see? Officer Wilson's voice caught. That I've been treating people differently based on how they look. I didn't think. I never saw myself as. She couldn't finish. Dr. Powell nodded. The hardest patterns to see are the ones inside ourselves. Is this part of my termination process? Officer Wilson asked. No. This is part of Lieutenant Richardson's reform program. He's given you a choice. She handed Officer Wilson an envelope. Inside was a letter outlining 2 options: resignation with a neutral reference, or a 6-month intensive rehabilitation program while on unpaid leave with no guarantee of reinstatement. Why would he give me another chance? Officer Wilson asked, bewildered. That's a question you should ask him yourself, Dr. Powell replied. He's agreed to meet with you tomorrow, if you're willing. Officer Wilson stared at the letter, feeling something she hadn't felt in days. A tiny flicker of hope. That evening, Lieutenant Richardson sat at his kitchen table, his wife across from him. Are you sure about this? She asked. After what she did to you? He touched the fading bruise on his face. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about change. Real change doesn't happen by throwing people away. And if it doesn't work? If she doesn't change? Richardson looked down at his cup of tea. Then at least we tried something different. The old way hasn't been working for anyone. The next morning, with the heart pounding, Officer Wilson prepared to face the man she had wronged, unsure of what to say but knowing this conversation might be the most important one of her life. The community center felt like neutral ground, not the police station, not Officer Wilson's home. Sun streamed through large windows into a small meeting room with a round table. Officer Wilson arrived 15 minutes early, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple blouse. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She jumped when the door opened and Lieutenant Richardson walked in, carrying 2 paper cups. Coffee, he said, placing one in front of her. Black. Dr. Powell mentioned that's how you take it. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt strange. The man she handcuffed was bringing her coffee. Lieutenant Richardson took a seat across from her. Up close, the bruise on his face was yellowing around the edges. Neither spoke for a long moment. I didn't think you'd agree to meet me, Officer Wilson finally said. I almost didn't, he admitted. My wife thinks I'm crazy for being here. Mine would too, if I had one, Officer Wilson said with a weak attempt at humor. The ghost of a smile crossed Lieutenant Richardson's face, then disappeared. I read your letter, he said. Both options. Why would you offer me any choice at all? Lieutenant Richardson leaned back in his chair. 20 years ago, my first year on the job, I made a horrible mistake during arrest. Not like yours. No one got hurt. But I violated someone's rights because I was scared and undertrained. He paused. My captain could have fired me. Instead, he made me face what I'd done and learn from it. That changed the entire course of my career. Officer Wilson looked down at her untouched coffee. I've been looking at my arrest records, she said, marking them, analyzing my own patterns. It's hard to face. It should be hard, Lieutenant Richardson said firmly. That's the point. I've never thought of myself as, she struggled with the word, racist, he supplied. Most people don't. That's why it persists. Tears welled in Officer Wilson's eyes, but she blinked them back. I don't deserve another chance. This isn't about what you deserve, he said. It's about what might actually create change, not just for you, but for the department, for the community. Outside, they could hear children playing in the community center's playground, life going on. The program I'm proposing isn't easy, Lieutenant Richardson continued. 6 months of intensive training, therapy, community service in neighborhoods you've policed. You'll work with community leaders who have every reason to distrust you. You'll be uncomfortable every single day. And at the end, we reevaluate. No guarantees. Officer Wilson nodded slowly, taking it in. Why now? Why start with me? Because your case got attention, he said simply. People are watching. If we can show real change is possible, not just punishment, but transformation, maybe we can start something meaningful. He pulled out his phone and showed her something, a news article about protests at police headquarters. These aren't just about you anymore. They're about a system. Your choices are part of that system, but so are mine. So is every policy that trained you or failed to train you. Officer Wilson studied his face. Do you actually believe people can change? Or am I just a project to you? Lieutenant Richardson set down his phone. When I was 9 years old, a police officer grabbed me outside a convenience store because I matched a description. I was just buying ice cream. His voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected old pain. That officer never knew what impact he had on me, never had to face me as a person. He tapped the table between them. This conversation we're having right now, this human connection, this is already different. Officer Wilson felt the weight of his words. This wasn't abstract anymore. If I choose the program, she said slowly, I want to face the people at that store too. The clerk. Those teenagers. I need to apologize to them directly. Lieutenant Richardson nodded. That's a start. And the videos online. The news stories. Those don't go away. Living with consequences is part of accountability. She took a deep breath. When does the program start? Today, Lieutenant Richardson said. It started the moment you walked in that door. For the first time since their encounter at the convenience store, their eyes met fully, not as officer and suspect, not as subordinate and boss, but as two people trying to find a way forward through complicated human territory. I'm ready, Officer Wilson said, and for the first time in days, she meant it. As they left the community center together, a reporter spotted them from across the street. Before she could approach, Lieutenant Richardson spoke quietly. Now comes the hard part. Are you sure? Officer Wilson nodded. Yes, I'm sure. 3 months into the program, Officer Wilson hardly recognized her life. Gone was the uniform, the patrol car, the familiar routine of roll call and reports. Instead, her days were filled with community service at the local youth center, therapy sessions with Dr. Powell, and the most challenging part, weekly listening circles with community members who had experienced police misconduct. Today, she stood in the convenience store where it all began, not as a customer but as a volunteer, stocking shelves alongside the owner, Mr. Patel. "Those energy drinks go on the top shelf," he instructed, pointing to a cardboard box by her feet. She nodded and continued working. Mr. Patel had been hesitant when Lieutenant Richardson first proposed she volunteer here, but eventually agreed. 3 weeks in, they had developed a quiet working relationship. "My nephew is coming back next week," Mr. Patel said suddenly as they worked. "The one who was working when, you know." Officer Wilson paused, again halfway to the shelf. "I'd like to apologize to him in person, if that's okay." Mr. Patel studied her for a moment. "You're different now." "I'm trying to be," she replied honestly. The bell over the door jingled as a teenager entered, one of the boys who had been there that day. He froze when he saw Officer Wilson. "It's okay, Darnell," Mr. Patel called out. "She's just helping today." The boy cautiously approached the counter, never taking his eyes off Officer Wilson. She felt the weight of his gaze but continued stocking shelves, giving him space. After he left, Mr. Patel said, "That boy comes in every day. He was scared to come back after what happened." The words hit Officer Wilson like a punch. "I never thought about that," she admitted. "How it affected everyone else who was there." That evening, Officer Wilson sat in the community center basement with 15 other people in a circle. This was her 8th listening session, part of Lieutenant Richardson's reform program. Each session focused on hearing directly from community members about their experiences with police. Tonight, a gray-haired woman spoke about her grandson being stopped 3 times in 1 week walking home from basketball practice. As Officer Wilson listened, she no longer felt the defensive urge to explain or justify that had dominated her early sessions. Instead, she just absorbed the woman's pain and frustration. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it brief. "Thank you for sharing that. I'm here to listen and learn." After the session, Lieutenant Richardson joined her for their weekly check-in walk around the neighborhood park. These conversations had evolved from tense and formal to something approaching comfortable. "Dr. Powell says you're making progress," he commented as they walked. "Some days I feel it. Other days it feels like I'm just going through motions," she admitted. "That's normal. Real change isn't linear." They passed a playground where children were playing in the evening light, parents watching from nearby benches. "Next week is the halfway point," Lieutenant Richardson said. "The Department Review Board will want a progress report." Officer Wilson tensed. "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That you're doing the work, but 6 months isn't enough to undo a lifetime of conditioning." They stopped walking. In the distance, a police car cruised by, and Officer Wilson felt a strange mix of longing and apprehension. "Do you think I'll ever wear the uniform again?" she asked. Lieutenant Richardson considered this. "That's not really the right question." "What is?" "Whether you should, whether it's the best way for you to serve the community." That night, Officer Wilson sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, working on something she'd been drafting for weeks. A training module based on her experience, designed to help other officers recognize their own biases before they led to harmful actions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Powell. "Don't forget Community Forum tomorrow. You're on the panel." The thought of speaking publicly about her mistakes still terrified her, but she'd done it 3 times now. Each time got a little easier. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of her uniform hanging in her closet, covered in plastic from the dry cleaner. For the first time, she considered the possibility that she might never wear it again, and found that the idea didn't devastate her as it once would have. Maybe serving the community didn't require a badge. Maybe there were other ways to create safety and build trust. Maybe her purpose was evolving into something she couldn't have imagined before. The next morning, she arrived at the community forum early to help set up chairs. Lieutenant Richardson was already there, deep in conversation with the chief and several community leaders. When he saw her, he waved her over. "Everyone," he said, "Officer Wilson has something important to share about our new training initiative." As she stepped forward to join the circle of leaders, she realized how far she had come. Not just from that terrible day at the convenience store, but from a lifetime of unexamined assumptions. The journey wasn't over, it might never be, But for the first time, she felt like she was truly facing the right direction. 6 months to the day after the incident, Officer Wilson stood outside the police department headquarters. The building looked exactly the same, but she was not. Her hair was different, she'd let it grow out. Her posture was different too, less rigid, more open, but the biggest changes were invisible to anyone passing by. She took a deep breath and walked up the steps, nodding to officers she recognized. Some nodded back. Others looked away. She'd expected that. The conference room on the 3rd floor was arranged differently than she remembered. Chairs in a circle instead of rows. Lieutenant Richardson stood talking with Chief Bennett and several people she didn't recognize, community members she guessed from their civilian clothes. Officer Wilson, Lieutenant Richardson greeted her, extending his hand. They shook. A gesture that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. Today was her final evaluation. The department review board would determine whether she could return to duty after completing the reform program. But this wasn't like any review board meeting she ever seen. Community members outnumbered officers 2 to 1. Everyone took their seats. Lieutenant Richardson began. 6 months ago, we started an experiment, not just with Officer Wilson, but with our entire approach to accountability and reform. He looked around the circle. Today we evaluate not just one officer's progress, but whether this model has value for our department and our community. Chief Bennett spoke next. Officer Wilson's case became very public. Many called for immediate termination. It would have been easier to do that. He paused. But easier isn't always better. A community leader named Mrs. Washington spoke up. I've been fighting for police reform for 30 years. I've seen officers get fired, only to be hired by another department the next county over. What Lieutenant Richardson proposed was different, actual transformation, not just punishment. One by one, people shared their observations. Dr. Powell discussed Officer Wilson's therapy progress. Mr. Patol described her volunteer work at his store. Youth Center kids talked about the basketball league she helped coach. Then it was Officer Wilson's turn to speak. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake, she began, her voice steady. But that mistake exposed patterns I'd been blind to for years. I can't change what I did that day. But I have changed how I understand it and how I'll move forward. She looked at the photos on the wall, officers in uniform, proud and serious. I used to think the badge made me the authority on right and wrong. Now I understand that real authority comes from the trust of the people we serve, trust that has to be earned every day. The room fell silent when she finished. Lieutenant Richardson stood up. Officer Wilson has completed every requirement of this program. The question now is, what next? Chief Bennett cleared his throat. The department is prepared to reinstate Officer Wilson to modified duty based on the recommendations before us. Officer Wilson raised her hand slightly. Actually, sir, I've been thinking about a different path. The chief looked surprised. Go on. The training module I developed about bias recognition, other departments have expressed interest in it. And the work I've been doing with youth in the community. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm requesting assignment to the new Community Relations Division that Lieutenant Richardson is forming. I believe I can do more good there than on patrol. Lieutenant Richardson raised his eyebrows but nodded slowly. It's an unorthodox request, but given everything we've learned, it makes sense. 3 hours later, it was decided. Officer Wilson would return to the force, but in a new role, helping to build bridges between police and the communities they served, especially in neighborhoods where trust had been broken. As the meeting ended, Lieutenant Richardson pulled her aside. You surprised me today, he said. I thought you'd want your old position back. She shook her head. 6 months ago, that's all I wanted. But this journey, it showed me there are different ways to serve. He nodded. The easy path would have been to fire you. The easy path for you would have been to quit. We both chose the harder road. Do you think it made a difference? Beyond just me, she asked. Lieutenant Richardson gestured to the window. Outside, the department was installing a new sign, Community Safety and Relations Division. 12 officers have volunteered for the new division. 4 commanders from other precincts have asked about implementing similar reform programs. He smiled slightly. It's a start. As they walked out together, a reporter approached them, the same one who had been there that day outside the community center months ago. "Officer Wilson, can I get a statement about your reinstatement?" Officer Wilson looked at Lieutenant Richardson, who nodded encouragingly. "It's not about getting my job back," she said, facing the camera directly. "It's about doing the job differently. For everyone." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Officer Wilson drove home in her personal car. Her uniform and new division badge lay on the seat beside her. The weight of the badge felt different now, not the burden of authority, but the responsibility of trust. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never was. Some colleagues would resist. Some community members would remain skeptical. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But for the first time in her career, she felt like she was truly protecting and serving, not just wearing the words on her car door.